Can everyone hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah. I got some advice this morning in the sauna, and if you get advice in the sauna, you should always follow it. And the guy said, speak some Dutch today, so my naam is Stef en ik ben verslaafd. So. Well, in fairness, I've been living in Amsterdam for 6 years, so I should have that much. I am really, really grateful to be here. I've really had to come to terms with the fact that I don't believe that I should be here, for many reasons, but I think today, because a couple of months ago I rang the speaker seeker for this convention, and I said, I've had a relapse. So after almost 2.5 years in recovery, and I will talk about the relapse later, I rang Wouter, and so I told him that I'd had a relapse, and I assumed, of course, that this would not happen, and that's why I was calling, because I didn't deserve to be a speaker at a convention anymore. So he said, look, let me get back to you. And I got a call, and they said, well, we'd still like you to speak. I can't tell you how special that was for me, because for someone who's lived my entire life in shame and feelings of not being worthy, to be told that, that I can still be seen and that I still deserve my place here is everything to me, because that helps my recovery as well. So I'm really, really grateful for that opportunity. Just don't fuck it up. Okay, so I am very nervous. In my mind I'm like an Oscar-winning dramatic comedic actress, but when I actually speak, it's like the jigsaw of my life just falls out onto the floor and the pieces are everywhere, and now I'm like, okay, well, I hope they come together during this time, so fingers crossed for me. And as you said, Thomas, I hope, that some people come or whatever. That's a little bit the ego, and I can definitely admit to having an ego. Normally it's that I'm not deserving of something, but that's still a bit of self-obsession, right? So, yeah. I'm going to go back to the start, because that's where it all begins, and part of recovery is I really loved learning about the inner child, which really only came about when I went to treatment, and I'm still very much, she's still very much inside me, because I feel her fear all the time. I'm trying as an adult to take care of her and to look after her, but it's hard work. I also want to say, if anyone came here thinking Stef was a guy, apologies. I know that's a really typical Dutch name. I showed up at an appointment once and they looked at me like, oh, I was expecting a guy. And then I realized, okay, I have to say Stephanie when I'm making appointments. But anyway, not a guy. So back to, my little girl. I think it's so important, because so many of the things that I realize about myself, and from what I've heard about recovery, it's the same for so many of us. We go back to our childhood and we try and heal those parts of us, because we've carried that into our adult life. And you think as a grown-up it would be so easy, just to be like, well, I'm big now and I can figure all that stuff out. But my childhood shaped me so much. I would say when I was about 5 years old, I come from Ireland, by the way, maybe you know by the accent. A little bit the story. My dad kind of just disappeared when I was 5 years old. He left. When I was older, I heard about the circumstances and everything, but when I look back, I don't ever remember getting explanations or being involved in what was going on. It was just he was there one day and he wasn't the next day. And I can imagine that's really confusing for a little girl, but I guess I had the perception that you just get on with things. And I wouldn't see my dad again until I was 18 for 1 week, and then I wouldn't see him again until I was 39, I think. yeah, but I was so different at each stage of my life then that it was okay. Um, my mom, like, I know that she loved me so much, but she tried so hard to provide for me by working her ass off, never wanting me to want for anything, that I would have the same opportunities, but in that was her absence. And I really needed her because I had lost already one parent. So she wasn't really there emotionally, and I've never still had that discussion with her of like what was going on for you, because it's still too hard for us to talk in that way. I imagine it was really hard for her. But so I kind of had two parents missing. I had my grandparents, I had love. Like, I don't want to take that for granted, but yeah. So then she got into a relationship with someone, and he was an alcoholic, an incredibly like verbally abusive person. And again, now I know that's because of his own pain and everything. I can look back, but I was a child, and over many years, just constant comments of being put down, his own pain being taken out on me. Many little things just chipped away at my insides over a very long time, and I still do not have that back. So that set me up for something. But one thing was happening in my childhood, living in an alcoholic household. I know I'm not alone with that. I would come home and I would, be prepared for like, who do I have to be to stay safe right now, Do I have to not be around? Do I have to be really happy? Do I have to just be silent? Like, what's needed of me? And when your home is not a safe place, I mean, that's kind of something you deserve as a kid, right? So this created many aspects of my personality. So yeah, I was so lucky in many things. So drugs didn't come into my life for a really long time. But I had addiction in my life to many things until I found drugs. I was very lucky because I started rowing when I was like 14, and it was my first addiction, and I was very good. And it gave me a break from the home, I was down in the rowing club every single day because I was being told that I was good at something, and I wasn't at home. That's as standard as it was. But anyway, I became quite good. I was getting all this recognition for doing something well, and it was really the only time I really wanted to work hard at anything. Certainly wasn't into school. In school I was the class clown, because I learned, if I'm kind of happy all the time, then I'm really getting a positive reaction from people. So anyway, with the rowing, like, I got a lot of opportunities. I rowed for Ireland, I won gold medals, I got a scholarship to study in America, all this good stuff. People, I had lots of friends, but I was living in a complete fog. I was constantly looking for the thing that was going to fix me. Like, if I was alone, I never felt good. So rowing was like a way of fixing me because I was constantly getting adrenaline from it. Or like food or going around, like anything. I was constantly on the hunt for, to fix myself. It worked for so many years. Just keeping myself topped up with fitness and, I heard actually when I was an athlete then something about, sometimes when athletes quit sports, they find addiction because you need something to replace the adrenaline. Well, first I got into marathon running, and then I think I was doing some swimming and everything, like it went on and on and on. And that was great. And on the outside, everything looked really great, but on the inside, again, that fog was just there. I definitely didn't love myself. If anything, I would say like self-loathing and self-hatred was a thread that I can now recognize and put words into, but just always looking for external validation from anything. Spending, like shopping, I'm just constantly like, a euro here, a euro there on sugar or whatever it was, didn't matter. everything on the outside were the only things that could make me feel better. Before I really got into problems with cocaine, I had tried any other drugs. I never said no to any drugs, because when I did eventually, I think it was like magic mushrooms or something, I was like, oh my God, like subconscious stuff. Anything that touched my subconscious was like amazing. I couldn't, the sense of relief from it was great, you know, just understanding myself better. Like, I had no idea that you could tap into your subconscious or go deep within yourself just by yourself. And then on the other hand, I was this overly analytical, highly emotional person all the time. It was chaotic. Yeah. So I think many relationships, I had many long-term relationships. At some point I had to say to myself, like, there's a constant cycle happening here, you know. They always fall in love with you so quickly, and you always fall in love so quickly, but it never lasts. Like, something always, I always thought it was them, something always gets kind of destroyed, and it always ends badly, always lasts around 2 or 3 years. And in my 30s, I think I began to see that there's a bit of a cycle here, you know. It takes a bit of repeating of your cycles before you realize, shit, this keeps happening over and over again. Like, maybe I need to figure this out. One of those worst relationships was when I moved to Amsterdam with that person, and they were really a repetition of my stepfather, because it was a really verbally abusive relationship, and yet it was my comfort zone, you know. I know how to be talked down to, because I talk down to myself, and I've had this my whole life. The critical voices of my mom and my stepdad, eventually I just internalized them, and that was just my inner monologue anyway, all the time. So yeah, abuse me all you want, because I kind of like it here. I know what to do. I know how to suffer. I don't know how to thrive. So of course, you know, I always have this thing as well of like, why did I stay so long? But when you're in something like that, you find reasons to stay. Yeah, it's crazy now that I think about it, but I also understand it. It was kind of like attention is attention, you know, and I needed attention. I wasn't able to give it to myself. It was kind of funny, because was in that time that he was a coke user and I was into other things, and we actually used to have I remember this argument that we had where he wanted to use coke and I wanted to use ecstasy, and we had a massive fight over that. Like, how dysfunctional is that? But anyway, you know, when you're in it, these things are normal. Like, we have to have the same high, or else this is kind of stupid. I hated coke because it made me anxious. And yet, during the breakup of that relationship, I went from using a little bit to using some when he was in the bedroom and I was there by myself, to when we broke up, I would be using only on the weekend. And then I'd start using on the weekday, but never after 10 p.m. because I had work the next day, to showing up to work after 2 hours sleep, to using at work. I hated coke. It made me so anxious, like I literally have an allergy, and yet I found myself addicted to that substance. I did not use with other people because I could never use the way other people used. Everyone would notice, like, yeah, I would buy some for me, and then I'd buy some for all of us to share, but mine will be in my pocket, you know, and yeah. Crazy. I remember asking I met the drug dealer once, and I said to them, yeah, but you know, it makes me really anxious. And he just looked at me and he's like, you're using too much. You just have to use a little bit. I never knew how to do that. I never wanted to just use a little because I wanted to numb myself completely. So even though it made me anxious and I didn't necessarily enjoy it, I loved to feel different. I loved to feel completely different. My whole life was consumed with feelings. And now I was a bit numb, you know. I know how to use really well because when I'm using, I just have one thing to do. I only have one job, well, maybe two jobs. I have to use and then I have to recover. But living life is something that requires a whole set of skills that I don't have. So using was easy. Anyway. Yeah, I remember, so I was living, I destroyed another relationship because of my addiction. I lived with another partner. He never even knew that I used. I was doing it so secretly. I was so good at wearing masks my whole life, and then addiction became another mask. I was great at hiding it. So much so that when we lived together, he didn't even know half the time that I was high. He'd just sometimes look at me and he'd be like, "Are you okay?" And I'd be like, "Yeah." Watching a movie together, and I'm just miserable. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And of course I hated myself because I didn't understand what was going on. I mean, I just knew I wasn't doing well. That ended. I had a girl move in with me who became a very close friend of mine, and after I got into recovery, I asked her, as we should, how was it for you? And she said, one day I came into your room and you said that I said to her, "Bia, if anything ever happens to me, please clean up the room before the police come over, because my room was so messy and it looked like the room of an addict. I was so ready to be dead that and all I could think was, don't let them see my room this way, but that's the insanity. And that's where I was. And that was horrible for her, but for me it was normal, because I was thinking that way every day. I don't want to wake up tomorrow. I don't really want to kill myself, but I just don't want to feel this pain anymore, And every day, eventually I was using every day. Every day I was just waiting for the heart attack, and I expected it. And I couldn't sleep anyway, but I also couldn't sleep because I was just waiting to die, basically. Pretty shit. And yet, when I went into treatment, there was only 2 people knew that I was going to, 3 people knew that I was going to treatment for addiction. My ex, my housemate, and my mum, who I told like a week beforehand. Now, she was living in Ireland, so that was a great way for me to keep all those things apart. Nobody knew that I was an addict because I was so good at wearing my mask. Everyone knew I wasn't doing well, but I could so put on the smile and just hang in there for the time that I needed to hang in there for, until I could get home and just use or sleep or whatever. I managed to hold on to my job, which I still am like, how did that happen? I don't know. But I got so into autopilot of survival that somehow it happens. Amazing. So I went into treatment. I met Thomas and Vera. I'm really, really grateful. When they told me I could have like 2 people up here today, I was like, yes, don't have to be alone. And I'm not alone. I'd gone to meetings while I was still in active addiction. One was another fellowship, and honestly, it didn't help, because I went there and everyone was doing all these readings, and I didn't feel a part of. I felt apart from. I felt very separate, because everyone seemed to be in this group of everybody knowing what was going on, so. And I didn't have a clue what the hell was going on. And I'm talking about the readings and the Serenity Prayer, right? I'm not the sharing, but everyone just knowing what the format is. And I was just like, I stopped going. Before I went to treatment, I went to my first CA meeting, and a couple of the organisers of the committee were at that meeting. And I will never forget my first CA meeting, because everybody came up to me, and I needed so much to be seen, and I needed to just feel welcome, and I felt at home, I was just so happy that I went to that meeting on a day where I just happened to be there with people who were like, there's a newcomer, let's look after her, and they did. And loads of people had been to the treatment centre where I was going in Scotland. Everyone was like, this is the best thing you're ever going to do. Because I wasn't able to stop by myself. I tried. It wasn't happening. So I will never forget that first CA meeting. And I went home that night and I didn't use for the first time in a really, really long time. Yeah. So, treatment was difficult. I love, like, treatment centres are brilliant because you go on to their websites and this one is like, it's like in the mountains and it looks amazing. And somebody there, one of the patients, their wife was like, well, you're just on holidays, you know? And sometimes I get pissed off at this website because I'm like, this does not reflect the reality of treatment at all. Treatment is difficult. It's just lucky that we're, you know, in a nice environment. I was there for 15 weeks. I think there I learned that there's another way to live, you know. I really had massive issues with control my whole life. I mentioned to someone today that when I was like 18 or 20, my partner at the time gave me the nickname of Captain Demando because things, you know, that it is funny, but it's like a bit sad because I had to have things a certain way to feel okay. If everything was just so, I felt safe. And if I thought that it wasn't, like, I was always planning and organizing things, because if I did the planning and the organizing of things, I could have control over where we were, who we were with, what we were doing. But it was very hard if those things didn't go to plan. And if someone didn't want to do what my plan was, I didn't really want to accept that. I was always peer pressuring people to do it my way. I forgive myself for that now, because I realize that that really comes from a place of just wanting to feel okay, you know. So I realized like letting go. I heard all about this letting go, but you know, finally I understood about the readings, and I really had an education in the program. Like, learning about the program and doing the program are two very different things. You know, you do steps 1 to 12, and that's a process, and that's really grand. But experiencing the 12 steps, who knows how long that's going to take, but I had to like really live through them. I have to feel things to understand them, you know, and that's a whole different ball game. But I kept learning about letting it go, and I was like, yeah, you know, I'm not getting it. I'm going to go home and use if I go home now. Like, I was panicking because my time was going up, and my therapist said I was, of course I was after a breakup, and was like, he's here with me everywhere I go, and she just said to me, like, just put him down. And I never knew how to do that before, you know. I never knew how to put something down, or how to let go of control, or the higher power stuff, you know. I could comprehend the higher power, but to feel the higher power is a different thing, and that took a lot more time, and that's okay, because the minute I grasped it for a second and I felt that freedom, I understood now, this is what I'm aiming for. Like, that's the feeling I want. And I had an idea. That was really nice. So I came back from treatment, and you know, I was a COVID recovery baby. Like, COVID happened while I was in treatment, and so I came. They said, do 90 meetings in 90 days. I did about 160 meetings in 90 days. I called my sponsor and I was like, I think I'm doing too many meetings every day. She's like, are you sober? I said, yes. Then she's like, just keep doing it, doesn't matter. I mean, looking back, I actually was a bit obsessed with recovery when I got home, but I'd finally found something that kept me sober and kept me safe. And of course, being an addict, I wanted to dive in and just consume the hell out of it. And it took some time, and that's okay. It took some time for normal life to creep back in, but the world was having the same experience. It took a long time for normal life to creep back in for everybody. And I was there with them, but I was so grateful that I wasn't experiencing my friends going out and having loads of fun, and that I was home clutching my fists, you know, like trying to stay sober. Everyone was going through that. We all had to stay in. I'm so grateful for COVID for that. Yeah. So recovery, like, I think an example of recovery that was really nice. It took a lot of therapy as well, by the way. I have a dual diagnosis. I was diagnosed a year and a half ago with borderline personality disorder. And some people, they don't like the labels of stuff. For me, it was like such a sigh of relief that I had words. I like having words to describe what's going on, you know, to be able to have conversations with myself or other people, to have and in the Netherlands, so I'm grateful, you know, to many things. I'm grateful to the Dutch health system, because if I was in any other country, I don't know where I would be. I probably wouldn't have gotten into drugs as quickly, because Amsterdam really wasn't helpful with that. But like, I also wouldn't have had the support, because in the Netherlands they recognize addiction as a disease, and we want to take care of you, and we want to look after you, and the support really was amazing. So I got the diagnosis, and getting the diagnosis means we're going to now support you with therapy. So I'm there, I have my diagnosis, I have therapy, and by the way, it took a year of waiting. I just started treatment 2 weeks ago, but it's still there, and I have my program. And the two of those working together, that's dual recovery, you know, dual recovery for a dual diagnosis. And I learned a lot. So I remember, like, each time I was going home to Ireland, I was seeing like the development of myself in my recovery. And I'll never forget this moment, you know, where I was home for Christmas, and my mum was freaking out because she wanted us to all play a game together after Christmas dinner. And I wanted to watch TV. I was like, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, is this going to ruin your Christmas if we don't do this? And she said, yes. And suddenly I just looked at her and I was like, she's acting out of pain. She's acting out of her pain. She's looking for control, the same kind of control. Well, look where I learned it, you know. And I could just see her pain. And I was never able to do that before, because before I just reacted to everybody who was, you know, I would take these things personally. Like, if somebody's going crazy, then it must be about me, right? So I'm going to react, and we're going to get into a fight, or I'm going to get into shame, and I'm going to put my head down, and I'm going to start crying. And for the first time I could say, that's her stuff and it's not about me. And I was 40 years old when that happened. Like, to go 40 years and never be able to do that, like, this is suddenly this superpower that I have, and recovery gave that to me, and I'm so grateful. Now, I'm not perfect, obviously, so there's sometimes people react and I'll react back, but you know, having awareness is such a huge development in my life. Self-awareness, or awareness of others and what they might be going through, you know. So that was a lot of growth. Anyway, so this year I had 2.5 years off work. I was very lucky in my recovery, but guess what? That began to be my safety bubble. I was really safe in my not working, and I was doing volunteering, and you know, I was able to get as much rest as I needed, and there was very little stress in my life, and I was really happy in my recovery in that way. But it was time to get a job. I did study addiction counselling. I really enjoyed that, but it was time to get some work, and then I had to move house. So I had a job interview and I got a job, and I was going to be moving house at the same time, and I was in a new relationship, and I kept hearing, everything is going so perfectly for you, Stef, everything is amazing, your life's so coming together. But guess what? I was screaming on the inside. I was screaming, I'm not good at things going well. I'm really, really bad at it, because I don't know what that looks like. I just know that I have that fuck it button. And I pressed it. After 2.5 years, I relapsed. And I want to say that it was a choice, but the thing is, I didn't know how to handle what was going on. I didn't know how to really look success or moving forward in the eye. I only knew how to look away and just be like, let's avoid this, because I don't know what this feels like and I don't know how to handle it. I only know the cycle of chaos. So I was relapsing for 2.5 months. Was on King's Day, actually. I was supposed to host a big party, and I had been up all night using, and I couldn't host anybody. So I told my friends. First person I told was my sponsor. I texted her. I was like, just send the text before you change your mind. And I have to say, like, the relief. But I lied for 2.5 months. I was going to meetings. I'm really ashamed of that. But of course, I thought I would just stop and it would be fine, you know. And I wanted to use, like, I'm not going to lie about that. I wanted to escape, and I was escaping. But here come the consequences. Thoughts that I didn't have for I don't want to say 2.5 years, but the balance that I had found in my recovery was just gone. I was all over the place again. I was having self-hatred thoughts. I was cancelling on all my friends. I was cancelling on my service. I was coming up with excuses, and I think it was the lies. Like, I couldn't believe the amount of lies that I started telling again. I didn't have to tell a lie when I was in recovery, you know. So it was shit. And the reason that I told my sponsor was because of the consequences. It wasn't really because I wanted to be honest. It was because I was tired of what was happening to me. And that's hard to say. A beautiful thing that came out of my relapse. Nobody knew that I was an addict, and I didn't tell the truth when I was going into treatment for the first time. But when I had my relapse, all my friends knew. Everyone I loved, people I didn't love, whatever. Everyone knew, because I was proud to be in recovery, and I was not ashamed. And so I told loads of people the first time I met them, whatever, if it came up, you know, I'm in recovery. Because I was so proud of myself. And I was out socialising and living my life, and I wasn't in fear, and I felt good about myself. Of course, why wouldn't I say, hey, this is what's happening with me, whatever. So I told everyone that I'd had a relapse, and the amount, the love that I got from my normal friends was incredible. Like, I couldn't believe it, that I was a bit, again, in self-loathing and self-pity, but they were loving me, and one of my friends said, you know, this is just one aspect of you, and we love you for all the other parts. But I only saw the shit that was happening, and I only define myself by the bad parts that are happening in my life, and I can be so self-critical that that's all I see of myself. So yeah. So today I'm 48 days clean and sober. I'm really grateful. Yeah. It's like a Balkan brass band has just come into the room. This is great. I love it. When I had my relapse, a fella who was in the room asked me to read a story in the big book. And it's a story that I loved. And listen, I don't know what page anything is on in the big book, but I know when I read the big book, I begin to feel a bit better, and I begin to feel a bit more connected, and something begins to work, you know. And it's the story Freedom from Bondage, and that is the one that I connect with the most. So I'm just going to read a small passage from it. Through my efforts to get down to causes and conditions, I stand convinced that my emotional illness has been present from my earliest recollection. I never did react normally to any emotional situation. I am the result of the way I reacted to what happened to me as a child. What is much more important to me, AA has taught me that through this simple program I may experience a change in this reaction pattern that will indeed allow me to match calamity with serenity. And that's it. I have to learn to live life on life's terms, because the more I fight it, the more I want to escape it, the more I want to numb myself, and that happened not so long ago. And I don't want to continue doing that, because recovery feels so good, and to live life in balance is can be a bit boring sometimes, but I love it, because long term I it's much better. I've been on such a high since I came to the convention that I know Monday is probably going to be terrible, and I have my home group. So yeah, you know, the other thing, I since I came back into recovery, I mean, I never left really because I stayed connected, but it's so funny the strength of love that I begin to feel for my home group on a Monday night, for example. Like, I can't wait to go to that meeting. The weeks leading up to the relapse, I was not doing my service. I was, I should have seen it from a mile away, you know. Prelapse, somebody called it in treatment. I thought that was very funny. Now I just can't wait to go, and I'm still doing my service position, and they gave me the keys of the church, so I'm like, that's a good sign. But I'm the greeter, and I closed the door one day because the meeting was starting and there was a knock on the door, and I opened the door and I was like, there was a guy standing there, and I was like, I know you. And he said, I know you. And I said, did you live in Dublin like 6 years ago? And he's like, yes. And it turned out we worked together 6 years ago, and like only knew each other a little bit. Neither of us knew we had anything to do with CA, but he was there standing at the door, and he came in and he gave me the biggest hug. And that for me, like, there's no coincidences, you know? Those moments are magic, and there's a higher power there, and I believe that, and I'm so grateful for it. And yeah, he was just after he was relapsing, and for him to see my face, like a face that he knew, was just like, it was just such a special moment, and I'm living for those moments and for the bits in between. I'm going to shut up. Thank you so much for listening. I'm so glad.